Hello everybody, my internet name is Indigo and today I'll be reviewing Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity for the Nintendo 3DS. I've seen a lot of hate for this game across the internet, complaining about things such as the lack of Pokémon, the easiness and the story. I've even seen several people claim that it ruins the series. I can understand why some may find it disappointing, but is it really that bad? Well, that's what this review is for. Gates to Infinity tells the story of a human who is summoned to the Pokémon world by a Pokémon named Muna, who wants you to rescue her from Hydreigon. After choosing one of 5 Pokémon to turn into, the human, who doesn't have amnesia this time, falls out of the sky and meets a Pokémon who will become their partner. The partner wants to start a paradise where all Pokémon can live together in peace, and you gather resources from missions in order to build facilities there. Along the way, several plot-important Pokémon join Paradise. Dunsparce is a coward who wants to become a great explorer. Emolga is his best friend and always stands up for him. Virizion is popular among the Pokémon of Post Town but doesn't like making friends. And Espeon and Umbreon, who aren't on the box art for some reason, are a pair of dungeon researchers. As a side note, I really like how the story treats Virizion just like any other Pokémon. I'm honestly getting tired of the Pokémon Company stuffing everything with legendaries in an attempt to be cool. Now, I'll be getting into the plot twist. If you want to avoid spoilers for both this game and Pokémon Super Mystery Dungeon, please click the annotation on the screen or go to the timestamp mentioned in the description. It turns out that the world is ending because the negative feelings of Pokémon have created an entity called the Bitter Cold. Many people have said that the idea is cheesy, or that the Bitter Cold doesn't belong in a Pokémon game, but they actually integrate the themes of hope and despair into the story very well. The Voice of Life, guardian of the world, took the form of a Hydreigon and summoned several humans to the Pokémon world in order to defeat the Bitter Cold, as regular Pokémon would be suffocated by the winds of despair that surround it, but the antagonists defeated the other humans. Muna, the main antagonist, hijacked Hydreigon's call to the player at the start of the game and tricked them into believing that she was on their side. In reality, she wants the world to end. They then go on to rehash the idea of a villain made of hate in Pokémon Super Mystery Dungeon, only this time the antagonist, Dark Matter, turns everyone into stone. While Gates of Infinity has several scenes showing Pokémon becoming negative, like Gyarados scamming the protagonist because someone insulted his work a long time ago, Virizeon's trust issues, and Muna wanting the world to end, Super has none of this. It's like they didn't know how to make Dark Matter exist without being sued by HAL Laboratories, so they just reused a major plot element from a previous game without really thinking about how to implement it. Shortly before the world almost ends, the protagonists tell everyone in Post Town about it. Most of the Pokémon don't see the point of saving the world, but Leaveney, whose child Swagloon was rescued by the protagonists earlier on in the game, and Lillipup later meet him in Paradise, where they say that they don't want the world to end because they want the children to have a future. To be honest, this might be my favourite scene in the series. Heck, Lillipup is definitely my favourite Pokémon Mystery Dungeon character, despite his small role. The scene is actually very touching, and I can't believe I forgot about it until my second playthrough. In the final battle against the Bitter Cold, the player is almost suffocating from the winds of despair when the positive feelings of the Pokémon cheering him on weaken the Bitter Cold. Cue awesome music! I really like that scene because it's one of the few scenes in the series where it feels like the secondary characters are actually important. I like it in stories where it feels like there's a functioning world beyond the protagonists. After the boss fight, there's a celebration scene that goes on for way too long, in which Hydreigon tells the player that they will have to leave or else they will cause a distortion, and that everyone will forget about them. The next day, the player returns to the human world, and on the way, Hydreigon gives them a prism, a kind of magic microphone thing, which the members of Paradise recorded a message on, saying that they'd never forget the player. While it again goes on for ages, the messages the Pokemon give are actually very bittersweet, and the music that goes along with this scene is great. After the credits, you don't immediately return to the Pokemon world. Instead, it turns out that nobody forgot the player, and the partner has to go to a dungeon in order to bring them back. While the post-game is disappointingly short, it's nice that they actually address that the player has a life in a human world for once. Now, let's talk about the presentation. Gates to Infinity, being on the 3DS, has, of course, transitioned to 3D graphics. Unlike the Japan-only WiiWare games, the models are completely new, instead of being reused from My Pokémon Ranch. While this allows for more dynamic cutscenes, the character models have very limited animation and still emote through portraits. Since some people say that 3D isn't right for Mystery Dungeon, and many people wanted Super to go back to Sprite before we got any footage of it. Gee, I wonder why this 3DS game has 3D graphics! Thankfully, this complaint has died down now, but still, it was like the Wind Waker all over again. The music, meanwhile, is much higher quality than before thanks to the extra cartridge space in the 3DS. The music is much more dramatic than before, and the instrumentation sounds a lot more realistic. Compare the original version of, say, Beach Cave to its remix in Super Mystery Dungeon, which uses similar instruments to Gates, to see what I mean. In addition, the tracks are a lot longer, with some lasting for about 3 minutes or so. My personal favourites are Ragged Mountain, Stirrings of Hope, Sympathy and Sincerity, the final dungeon theme, and several of the themes from the ending cutscenes. My biggest problem with the presentation is the text speed. I'm a fast reader and it gets really annoying to have to wait for the text to finish scrolling, especially when it was much faster in previous games. While it's not as slow as I remember from my first playthrough, it does make the cutscenes drag on, especially when you're replaying the game and you just want to get past the exposition and tutorials. The ending cutscene in particular goes on for over half an hour. When I first played the game, my 3DS was flashing red by the time I got to the end of the credits. How about the gameplay? Many have said that this is the easiest game in the series. There's a new mechanic called move growth, which means that moves get stronger the more you use them, which quickly makes early game moves overpowered. Apparently, the damage calculation was changed, so it's harder for Pokemon to lose all of their HP in one hit. There's also the removal of hunger, basically a timer that makes you lose HP when it goes down, except for a few DLC dungeons, which I honestly didn't really mind. What does bother me, however, is why they decided to make it so you can't restore HP by walking in any weather, even the non-damaging kinds. I like how you can now select attacks by pressing L and then the face button, instead of setting one move and having to open a menu to use the others. It's a lot more convenient. The dungeons, while randomly generated like in all Mystery Dungeon games, are a lot more maze-like than before, with longer corridors and rooms that aren't square. My biggest issue with the game is that there's only 144 Pokemon, which wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the fact that it feels like there are the same few Pokemon in every early game dungeon. And why are there ice types in a volcano? I've heard that the lack of Pokemon was due to Spike Chunsoft focusing more on figuring out how the 3DS works, but I'm not sure how true that is. Then there's the fact that they removed the option to choose the player and partner's genders in the international versions, which wouldn't be a problem, except that the characters refer to them with male pronouns multiple times. The other Mystery Dungeon games have gender-neutral writing. Why can't this one? Despite all this, a lot of hate Gates to Infinity get boils down to it not being Explorers. While Explorers blew my mind when I was younger, in recent years I've noticed an awful lot of plot holes in it. Maybe I'll do a video about that. Maybe I won't. Who knows? While I initially disliked it, over the years I've begun to realise that Gates to Infinity has a surprisingly deep plot, some very well-developed characters, and some amazing graphics and music to boot. Don't complain that it's different, be glad that it works properly, because the same cannot be said for all video game sequels.